Joining us now once again to talk about the state of the economy, Michigan business, and other news making headlines both in Michigan, the U.S., and around the world on an economic level is Michael Greiner, Assistant Professor of Management at Oakland University's School of Business Administration. Michael, thanks for joining us again today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Tyler.
Glad to have you on. And again, we'll start off with what has seemed to be the chief topic that we've discussed over the last month or so, inflation, as the Federal Reserve is expected to, for the third consecutive time, raise the interest rate by 0.75%. Now, the first time around that they did this, that was a significant move. It was an historic increase in the interest rate. And the fact that it happened a second time, just as massive, and now a third time, that really speaks to the significance of the inflation issue right now. What is really the motivation behind this continued massive surge in the interest rates from the Federal Reserve, and what impact do they expect that to have on the economy?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it really shows how serious the Fed is about attacking inflation. And in fact, you're right about the fact that they've done it now 3 times in a row, and the expectation is they're going to do it again, even in November when they have another meeting. So this is not something that they are kind of like not taking seriously at all. They've made attacking inflation a major priority, and Fed Chair Powell once again made that very clear at the meeting. And the way to do that, really, unfortunately, is by slowing down the economy. What the part of you really have to look at inflation within the context of the supply and demand curve, which all of us learned, in Economics 101, where basically if you have higher supply and lower demand, then it's going to mean that prices are lower. If you have higher demand and lower supply, then it's going to mean that prices are higher. And that's true with everything throughout the economy. So basically what we've got going on right now is an economy that, since it's been bouncing back from the COVID pandemic, has been white hot. And we've seen that month after month with the figures regarding employment. And as a result of that, people have money to spend. They want to spend more. And frankly, the producers aren't able to keep up with how much demand there is. So as a result, that drives prices up. And the only way to stop that is by kind of slowing things down. So that's really what the Fed is trying to do right now. Now, the biggest impact that this has is on the housing market. And indeed, we also got some numbers just today that showed that the housing market is slowing quite significantly and that applications for mortgages are way down. So it appears that the Fed's moves are starting to have an impact.
I'm joined by Michael Greiner from Oakland University School of Business Administration on today's edition of the Megacast. As we have said, the Federal Reserve expected to enact a third consecutive 0.75% rate increase on interest rates to combat inflation. And as Michael said, we should expect to happen for an unprecedented fourth consecutive month in November as well. And so the question would come up from those that maybe aren't as knowledgeable on this topic as you are, Michael. If it's happened for 3 straight months and inflation continues to be a major issue, how much of an impact really are these rates having, being that they're happening month to month and there seemingly aren't too many major changes, at least that regular Americans like you and I are seeing in our pocketbooks month to month?
Yeah, I once heard it describes that the Fed chair is kind of like trying to control the economy like someone who's flying a kite. And the kite is the economy, and they only have control of the string way down below. And that's kind of true. The American economy is huge. It's in excess of $20 trillion. So it's absolutely gigantic, by far the largest economy in the world at this point. And so the Fed really, they can only control so much activity with what they're doing. Now, the way that they do that is as they increase interest rates, it basically makes it more expensive for people to borrow. Now, they'll say, oh, it'll increase credit card payments. And it does a little bit. I think I saw that the average credit card bill is going to increase for most people by about $25. Similarly, it could increase the cost of buying a car, which again, that's true to an extent, but when you're talking about those smaller amounts of money, might increase the cost of buying a car by say $50 a month. So not huge amounts of money. The place you really see the impact is in the housing market, because when people go from, say, paying 3.5% on a mortgage to paying upwards of 6% for a mortgage. And we just saw that mortgage rates now have risen to more than 6.3%. So they're really going up. then that really slows things down very quickly. And then it's kind of like a house of cards that keeps spreading. So, as people are less likely to be able to get mortgages, then there are less people out buying new homes. As a result of that, there's less new home construction, which means that there are less people working in the construction industry or in the businesses that supply that. So, there might be layoffs there and fewer people working there. There's less money than kind of flowing around in the economy and less demand for the goods and services out there, which then that means that the economy kind of slows down. And in fact, I just noticed a report that said that we've never had a slowdown in the housing market that didn't result in a recession, which just shows how important a part of the American economy the housing market is. And in fact, this last set of inflation, where we were kind of surprised with how high it was driven almost exclusively, number one, by energy, particularly electric and gas, but number two, by housing costs. Which so that's kind of what we call a lagging indicator, which means that we kind of see that after it's already happened, and it takes a little while for these things to kind of boil their way through the economy. So that's kind of what the where the Fed is trying to kind of balance this. They don't want to get too aggressive. Because on the one hand, if they get too aggressive, then eventually when these things really do kind of hit the fan, then suddenly you're dealing with a major recession. They don't want that. So they want to kind of balance it where, yes, we get enough recession to bring down inflation, but not so much recession that it severely impacts the job market to the point where people are losing jobs in a big way.
We're joined by Michael Greiner from Oakland University on today's edition of the Megacast. He is an assistant professor of management in their School of Business Administration. More information can be found on all the programs at Oakland University by visiting oakland.edu. Oakland.edu. And there's no question that there is an immense impact on the U.S. economy and the world economy from immigration. And here in the U.S., according to the Washington Post, data from Customs and Border Protection indicated that more than 3.6 million people have been prevented from entering the country or apprehended after doing so in the past 2 years. Michael, these immigration numbers have a number of different effects on the U.S. economy. On the one hand, people are trying to come to the U.S. to create a better life for themselves, and on the other hand, when they do get into the U.S., in many cases, they're filling jobs. This has been the old adage that they're filling jobs that the American people that are already here simply are not interested in filling. Give us some insight on just how important immigrants, particularly those that are coming up from Mexico, which seems to be the most common border crossing for immigration in the U.S. That we've heard of over the last several decades, the impact that they have on our economy.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring this up because unfortunately, this is an issue that's really complicated that unfortunately has kind of been boiled down into this political football. And it really kind of misses the point here. Like you mentioned, the fact that there are 3.7 million immigrants who've come across the border. Yes, that's a lot. But the vast majority of them have either been sent back or essentially detained. Really, the only ones who are kind of left to go out there are families and children. So, kind of this demagoguing that we see on both sides of this issue really kind of misses the point here. But one thing that I think economists almost universally agree on is the fact that the United States needs immigration, that it is one of the great strengths of our country that we have this tradition of immigration here and that we are a nation of immigrants. There are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, as a country becomes more developed, like the United States, like Japan, like Europe, for example, you see the birth rates among the people who are born there go down. The typically we talk about the replacement birth rate being about 2.2 children per family, and among the native born Americans, similarly to native born Japanese or native born Europeans, the families that fall within that category, they have actually fallen below the replacement birth rate, which means that if you don't have some source of new people coming into the country, the size of the country will actually start shrinking. And you can see that happening in a number of countries. In fact, in Japan, that's happening. France has really struggled with this issue. They've been very successful at providing incentives to get people to have more children, essentially, but it's been at huge cost to their economy. You see, even in China right now, where they're starting to struggle with potentially a declining birth rate, and projections are that China has actually already reached the peak of its population. It's going to start declining now. The United States, though, has really avoided that problem. And the reason we've avoided that problem is because we do have this constant source of immigration with people coming across the Mexican border. Now, you mentioned, and elsewhere, by the way. Now, you mentioned the Mexican border. Interestingly enough, though, most of the people coming across the Mexican border at this point are not from Mexico. In fact, the largest source of immigrants right now are from Venezuela. We all have heard about all the problems going on in Venezuela and how basically they have a completely corrupt government, kind of communist socialist government where the economy has completely collapsed as a result of that. And the I saw that the United Nations projected that there are as many immigrants coming out of Venezuela as there are from Ukraine, which is really saying something. And most of those immigrants are coming to the United States. So the question is then, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, when you look at the data, people will say, oh, they take up, they're a burden on society because they take up certain services. But the reality is that immigrants work at a higher rate than native born Americans. In other words, that where native born Americans, about 62% of them will be in the job market or so. Among immigrants, upwards of 65 to 66% of them actually enter the job market. So more of them, a higher percentage of them actually work and thus pay taxes and contribute to the overall economy. Similarly, what's been found is that 93% of people who receive some type of benefit from either the federal or the state government are actually either working during that same period or married to someone who works. And that kind of emphasizes the fact that you've got a lot of these families who tend to take kind of short term work that is temporary, and as a result they might need assistance for certain periods, but generally speaking they're working and contributing to the economy. And you can't underestimate the fact also kind of the dynamism that these people generate, which is the fact that they bring the second generation who are born here uh, tend to be more highly educated, more productive, contributing more to the economy than people who are in the third generation or later in terms of being native born here. So that's why we see all these people who are immigrants winning or one generation removed, winning Nobel Prizes, being major contributors to different industries, including the high tech industry, et cetera. Really, the place that the United States is generating that dynamism is from the immigrant workforce. And I just want to point out one more factor here that just shows how important it is, which is that as the baby boomers are starting to get older, that means that there's going to be more and more of a demand on services like Medicare and Social Security in particular. So the question is, who's going to pay for that? Well, if we have fewer people working, then that means the burden's going to be higher on those people who are still working. How can we avoid fewer people from being the ones to support that? Well, by having more immigrants come in and basically paying more taxes to support the people who are retired. So again, almost universally, economists agree that immigration is a good thing for the United States, and hopefully we can get past a little bit of the rhetoric on this issue.
I got to look a little bit deeper than just the political sides of both of these arguments from all different angles, and look at the impact that being had by immigration, by other issues as well. Michael, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Tyler. Have a great weekend.